investors believe that what they need is lots more dough. Lots more dough.
Occupy isn't over in Edmonton.
So naive, they just don't know.
Protesters set up across the street from the University of Alberta this February to demand lower tuition and a freeze on faculty cuts. Police stood by to keep protesters off university property, but all continued peacefully.
If it's not in our people, if it's not in our social programs, what are we investing for? We are the country.
I think for the first time in a long time, people are finding hope again. And when you give someone the opportunity to speak, that they'll take it.
For months, we all watched as Occupy protests popped up all over the world. In fact, 82 countries worldwide saw their own version of the protest, primarily standing up against global financial systems. Many see this movement, and others like it, as a part of a societal shift towards activism, using the power of social media and peaceful demonstration. There are a variety of views in the Christian community on Occupy and similar-looking movements. Some leaders have supported Occupy for its stance against greed and extreme inequality. Other leaders have said Occupy promotes a utopian and unrealistic point of view and can often be more about rebellion than true change. So how do we participate in this kind of activism in a holy way? Biblical scholars Craig Evans and John Stackhouse say we must define activism first.
Activism is doing something. It's being active. It's being willing to put something in print. It's being willing to say something publicly, organizing, getting people together. That's activism. But I don't equate activism with breaking the law or touching off a riot or acts of vandalism. So I'm all about peaceful, respectful, law-abiding activism.
In the beginning, when God creates man and woman as human pair, he gives them one very particular thing to do. And we might think it's to worship God, but it isn't. It might be to love each other, but it isn't. Those things, I'm sure, are assumed. But the very first command in the Bible is for the human pair to look after the world. Activism, then, is part of what it means to be good gardeners of the world. It means looking at something and saying, no, that's wrong, that's out of whack, that's not functioning the way it's supposed to. It's unjust, it's unfruitful, it's even damaging or dangerous. I'm a human being. I'm responsible to do what I can to make the world better.
God has redeemed us from the curse of sin, but it is to this world that we are now sent as bearers of justice and truth of the kingdom.
Sean Burr sees ways he can change the world around him. He and his wife pastor a small neighborhood church in Edmonton. When they moved to the city 5 years ago, they got involved in the local activist community.
I tend to gravitate towards the groups that have to do with poverty and justice for the poor or the dispossessed.
What is the evidence of a community that knows their God?
I live in these two worlds, the world of the church and the world of the activist community that often don't meet. And I thought I would just put out a branch and say, hey, maybe I could be a bridge here. It's my desire to see more communication between Christians and activists. I think we have more in common than either camp usually believes.
Sean's sermons often focus on social justice. So when Occupy gained media attention late last year and an Edmonton group emerged, Sean joined protesters at a peaceful demonstration in the city.
Occupy communicates that we want to have a world where power just isn't just in the hands of the few, but then Occupy is organized by consensus and began with people living together and literally sharing life together, sleeping on the same ground and sharing food, cooking and cleaning up for one another.
Sean joined occupiers as they camped out on a small piece of land downtown in November. He visited the site on a regular basis. He even camped out for 2 days, bringing along his daughter. Others spoke with Sean about why they chose to get involved with Occupy. That gave him an opportunity to share his Christian faith. The Occupy Edmonton camp was eventually forced to abandon their site, but they continued to plan events and hold meetings. Sean began attending those meetings, in part acting as a voice from a Christian perspective. Eventually, Occupy organizers asked him to reach out to the local church.
The message that I felt that I could bring to the churches on behalf of Occupy, that any church with Christ at the center could accept, is that we would pray for Occupy. No matter what our political opinions, no matter what our opinions about the methods of Occupy, as Christians we can pray for other human beings that are working for a just world.
Many people have asked Sean how his Christian faith and involvement in activism fit together, given that some of the bold tactics used by Occupy have received criticism from Christian leaders.
I go to Occupy as a believer in Jesus, and I express my faith there. That doesn't mean that everything that Occupy does is something that I agree with. That doesn't mean that everything that every person in the Occupy community believes is something that I believe. That's okay. As a Christian, I'm going to find myself in all kinds of circumstances in this life where I'm amongst communities of people that are not like me.
So what role then does a Christian play in the world of activism? Is it to share the gospel, or is it to act as role models? According to John Stackhouse, it's both.
But we're supposed to show the world. This is what a properly functioning human society looks like. Christians need to be infiltrating everywhere. The only problem, it seems to me, for Christians, the only problem is when we misunderstand what God wants us to do. And then we act according to our misunderstanding. We may think too narrowly. For instance, we may think that we're supposed to just evangelize people. Or, if we're not from another part of the Christian family, we're only supposed to help people in their physical and social economic distress. But those are too narrow. God's got a much bigger calling for us than that.
Our calling is broad, but our messaging should be clear. Stackhouse says it's important for Christian activists to be intentional in their interactions and clear in their communications. In other words, be specific about change.
Christians should not be starry-eyed idealists. We have a Bible that's full of realistic stories that tells us the way the world really is. So we shouldn't just be showing off or getting stuff off our chest or sounding off. No, we should be analyzing the situation as carefully as we can, and then deciding, what do we have to work with? Who knows who? What networks do we have? What cultural power do we have to wield on behalf of the powerless? And what can we do then to maximize shalom in this situation?
The attraction to Occupy for me was Occupy's message of justice, primarily, but also the method of using community building as a way of communicating the message and participating together in creating a just world now.
And too many Christians think that holiness is a matter of not screwing up. But Jesus doesn't want us to be not bad. That double negative is not the Christian life. He says, I have come that you may have life, and abundantly. I want you to blossom with life. I want the world to be better because you're in it. And if it's no better because you're in it, then you're just taking up space.
For 100 Huntley Street in Edmonton, I'm Meagan Kelly.
For one people.